Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Allison Schilling, the Senior Program Officer here at the Concord Museum. Welcome to everyone who is joining us here in the Churchill and Janet Franklin Lyceum, as well as welcome to everyone who's watching the live stream. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Ken Gloss, who is the proprietor of the Brattle Bookshop and a frequent guest appraiser on PBS's Antiques Roadshow. The Brattle Bookshop was founded in Boston in 1825 and has been in the Gloss family since 1949. Ken was 5 years old when he started working there for his father. It is rumored that his first word as a baby was book. Over the years, Ken and his father have built the shop into one of the largest antiquarian bookshops in the country. Ken is a mainstay in the antiquarian book field, frequently lecturing, writing articles, and appearing on TV and radio shows on the topics of book appraisals, collections, and sales. Ken is a past president of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America's New England chapter and sits on the associate board of the Boston Public Library. He appraises books in libraries for several universities and institutions, including Harvard University, Boston College, and the FBI. Ken is with us tonight to discuss the value of old and rare books, share some stories of his favorite finds, and describe the joys of the hunt for rare books. Tonight's program will be about 40 minutes, and it includes opportunities for questions from all of you. And following the program, Ken will give verbal appraisals of your books that you brought with you. We will create an orderly line at the end of the program and do these appraisals nicely. And if for some reason we run out of time, Ken very nicely agreed to continue doing appraisals back at his bookshop in Boston, if need be. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ken.
Thank you very much. And what I do is the talk will last 40 minutes or so. I'll leave time for question and answer because I can go on and on and on and on about old books, and at least with question and answer I can go on about what you want to listen to. But the first half hour or so I'll give a little bit of my background, the history of the store, but mainly I'll tell stories, anecdotes of places I've been, books I've seen, a little bit of the history of the store, tell a little bit about the back scene of Antiques Roadshow, some of the stories with that. And at the end, what I do is appraisals. Now, obviously, the people watching online, that's a little bit harder to do. And here, quite honestly, I'll actually do anything and everything that people have brought, but it might not be, it will be very quick and not individually. But especially for the people watching on the computer on Zoom, if you send pictures to the store, we do that all day, all the time. So that's one of the ways we can get the appraisals done. And if anyone here doesn't get everything, pictures, calling, talking, one of the things you'll find even from this talk is I like to talk about old and rare books. And when you ask somebody a question who loves what they do, it's not a problem in getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. In any case, the history of the store does go back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And it's always been in Boston. People call us from Harvard Square and Brattle Street, where are you? We tell them we're downtown. When my parents first bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is. And we've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And my father built the store and his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge. And he was also a bit of a character and a showman. And every time we'd move the store, when it was a planned move, he'd move the best books over and then he'd run sales. Half-price, $1, 50-cent, quarter, dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell, the people go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again, that group would leave, the next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this, we were moving from the end of Washington Street to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can sort of picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books, and they drove it from the end of Washington Street, where the store was then, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend of his, told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He had gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street now. That was in 1969. We've been on West Street since then. When we first moved there, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. But we wanted to continue, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors down on West Street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And we reopened within a month. And the main thing, it was a meager stock. The main thing was just keep going. Over the next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1.03 and $5, 2 floors of general used books, and then a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general bookstore, is a dying business. It's not dying because people don't like books, read books, sell books, whatever. It's because particularly in the inner cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores that I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other, have been going out of business. And like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s, so I hope to be doing this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their 30s. I have grandchildren who are in their, literally, a few of them even the weeks old. But nobody right now seems to be going in, so I just have to live forever and keep doing it, and I enjoy it. And one of the real joys of this business is going out to houses and estates. That's how we get most of our books. And one thing just a little plug I'll say, I'm going to tell a lot of stories about people, places, things. Matter of fact, I have a small list here, but this list is about that thick with one word here, one word there, and I have about 10 pages. But now, with new technology, it's all on my phone too. And I could literally put this list up and throw a dot at it and just tell story after story with no order at all. But I also do a podcast. I have about 100-something episodes out, and they're all 15, 20, 25 minutes, and each one is random stories. So if you like it, Prattlecast. But the fun is going out. It's the houses, the estates. We get most of our books by that, and I'll relay a few of those stories. A number of years ago, I got a call, a lady. I was out of the store. A lady named Mrs. Fisher had called and said she had some books. Got back to the store, called her up. She said, yes, my father died in Providence. He has about 500 art reference books. Would you be interested in going to Providence to look at them? And 500 reference books sounds more than interesting. Providence is only an hour away. Matter of fact, I talked with a lady today who lives up in northern Vermont. That's 5 or 6 hours, and we drive to Philadelphia and all over. So an hour was nothing. They lived on Benefit Street, which is an old street up near Brown University. Got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. Got led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage, second floor of the garage. They had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 8 months, I bought 90% of the books I wanted. I was happy, she was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction, but would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport at the time was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family, and at one point wandering from the basement to the attic all on my own without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't touch this, and so on. And it was just fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I come to groups like this, or live or on phone or by pictures or whatever, I do hundreds of free appraisals. Matter of fact, my goal is that whenever you think of an old book, you think of me in the Brattle Bookshop. I don't care if you think of 10 others, and there are a lot of other good bookstores, but as long as I'm one of those 10. And one of the ways I feel I can do it is by giving out as much free information as reasonable. And there are times, though, when we charge for informal appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever, and then we discuss the fee. In any case, another mansion in Newport, not quite as big as the Brown family. This was the Perry family, Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry, and what they had was a whole series of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships. And it was fascinating. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus. Loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So that's changed a little nowadays too. And when my father was still alive, and he died almost 40 years ago now, but we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like she might have a few interesting things. Local, she lived in Sharon, so we decided to go. We got to the house. It was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling. Weeds were growing. And you sort of say, well, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. It turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle, but there was a lot more to it. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into her house, on one wall she had 10 watercolors. They were this size, pastoral European scenes. And when I first saw them, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she just sort of matter-of-factly turned around and said, oh yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner water, and it's like just matter-of-fact, like $1 million worth of painting. And that's a lot of it, and it's the characters and the people. A number of years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday party. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo's an awfully long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about sitting down to dinner once with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. And he said he was a younger man at the time. He was looking forward to the learning and insight he was going to get from these men. He was a little excited about it. He said he got to the table early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in and sat across. And Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing. And he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on and on with stories, which I'm going to do, but one more in this line. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store, and people asking, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little more involved. Occasionally, you really have to do some research, but actually, that can be fun. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago. I answered the phone, "Hello, Brattle Bookshop, can I help you?" Lady, elderly, thick Irish brogue, and the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." Now, you have to admit that gets your attention, and she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family, and when he was 3 and 4 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters from later 20th century presidents are particularly high-priced, harder to get, and so on. She wanted to get an offer on them. I was skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. Went to her house. She was great, wonderful stories. The letters were really nice. I gave her what I thought was a really good offer for them, but much as I suspected, there was no way she could sell these letters. The letters are part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong, and who knows, maybe I'll hear about them again. And a lot of times it's the people you meet. I guess since this is Concord, one thing I'll mention is if you need a book signed by Doris Goodwin, there's only one place you can get them now. When she moved out of Concord, she lives around the corner from us now, so it's very convenient for her to just stop by and sign books. But, you know, we know her, and my wife and I went out with her and another person out to dinner, and that was just a lot of fun. And there's one person who owes me a dinner. I don't know if I'll ever collect, but it's interesting. John Grisham wrote a book called Camino Island. I don't know whether any of you have ever read it. I mean, I like his books and so on. The basis of Camino Island is there's a book dealer in Florida. There's someone who steals F. Scott Fitzgerald manuscripts from Princeton, and they need to sell them. And they bring them to this book dealer in Florida, and he suggests going to a fence in Boston who would expedite the sale. The problem that I had with it is the fence, his name was Oscar, but he was in a bookstore, a 3-story brick building on West Street in Boston that had been owned in the family for over 60 years. And you know, I sort of said, I talked to somebody who knew Grisham, and I said, where's this coming from? I mean, West Street's only about, you know, out to the sidewalk there. And there's only one 3-story brick building that has a bookstore in it. And where's this coming from? And I was doing an Antiques Roadshow in Wisconsin, in Green Bay, but we were in Sheboygan. There's a great museum in Sheboygan of outsider art, but that's if you're ever there. But I'm walking in and the phone rings and my store said, someone called, they said, it said it's John Grisham. We're not sure, but here's the phone number. So I called, and it was him, and he had heard. I was a little upset, and I wasn't as much upset that in the book he said that I was a thief and a fence. It said it was a failing business, and that really upset me. So I ended up getting a signed copy, and in the signed copy it said, I owe you a dinner. Someday I'm going to go to Charlottesville and knock on his door and say, okay, I'm here. Give me but that's the type of thing that can happen. And a lot of fun of the store is the people. I mean, ultimately, that's it. You go to someone's library, and most often, the reason people sell in most cases is that either it's an older person couple moving from the big house to the smaller, or someone's died, and it's an estate. People don't generally like to give up their books that they've gotten. It's a part of their life. It's a part of their personality. Matter of fact, if it's one person had died, it's sometimes the other person can't even be there when we're taking the books out because it's like the person is leaving again. But it's the characters, and sometimes it's even the characters who work for us. Years ago, I hired a man. No, he ended up working for us for 17 years. But there are two things that happened right when he started working for us that sort of give an idea of what 17 years were like. A day or two after he started working, he was in the front of the store, and I was there, an older man who might be younger than I am now, but an older man at the time, came in and he asked for an obscure fiction writer named Doniford Yates. I knew who Doniford Yates was. We went to the section. We didn't have any. After looking a while, I said, would you like to leave your name? Because at that time, we took index cards. And he said, no, I'll stop in again. And he left. My employee comes up and goes, does that man come in here often? And I said, I really wasn't paying attention. He says, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And then to give you an idea of even more, this employee gave me one of the most memorable introductions I've ever had. We had 4 tickets to a Celtics game. Now, at the time, my wife didn't, but she worked for 10 years, as she liked to say, for the local professional basketball team in Boston. And if someone couldn't figure out what she was talking about, she figured, well, they don't know basketball anyways. But we had 4 tickets for a game, and I said, Hugh, do you want to go to the game? We've got 2 extra tickets. He said, sure, but give me the tickets. I'll meet you there. My wife and I get there. He's sitting with a woman, and we walk in, and he goes, oh, I'd like you to meet my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? I mean, it's like, oh, and that's 17 years of that. And one of the things that we had happen recently, and this is actually, it's really strange because when the pandemic hit, we were obviously closed for the 3 months where the governor closed down, and then we opened up, and we're careful. We still were going out to houses, but masks. Everybody on staff is now vaccinated and boosted. And actually, we've had more people calling us and canceling or postponing because they've come down with COVID in the last couple of months. Now, nobody's really been sick, but it's just we've been getting more. And having people call and postpone an appointment is frustrating. It's not, not that it's any fault. Someone's sick, another person, a relative had a stroke. It happens. But it can just be frustrating. You're busy, you blocked out all that time to go to their house. And there was one friend of ours who was also about books, and again, this was a while, but he called, he set up an appointment. He had a storage area in the Somerville-Cambridge line, and it was a nice storage area. It had electricity and all that, and he wanted to sell some books. He was having a hard time. He postponed, set up another appointment a week or so later, postponed. Set up another appointment 2 weeks later, postponed. This went on 4 times, and I just said, Russ, if you postpone on us again, we're just not going to come. That's it, period, no more. The 5th appointment, he calls up, he goes, you can't come, but it's not me, it's not me. It turned out the storage unit next to him, there was a lady who it was a really sad story in a way. Her husband had run out on the family 30 years earlier. He was abusive, he was an alcoholic, he'd run out. Nobody worried about where he was because, they figured that he was just an alcoholic. And this lady on her deathbed told her daughter, I have a storage unit in Cambridge. In that storage unit is a freezer. In the freezer is your father. And I said to Russ, okay, that's an excuse, fine. Well, and it was on the news the next night. So, I mean, it wasn't like he was making, so I figured that's one of the best stories. And fortunately, the power never went off in the storage unit or the freezer and whatever. But, you know, when I was saying I can just sort of point at things like this, sometimes people ask me, what's some of the more interesting, rare, and valuable? Now, I end this talk with a couple of stories, and one of them is what I consider the most valuable book. But I'll tell a few stories in the meantime. And I was asking Allison beforehand, I one time got called by a museum to do an appraisal, and they told me what they wanted, and I said, sure, I'll do it, and I was a member. I said, I'll do it for free, but I don't want to do it from your webpage. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to do it from the original. They said, no problem, just set up an appointment, come down and look. 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. So I'm standing holding. Now, that was on exhibit here. It was the Mass Historical Society, but I got to actually hold it. And, you know, I mean, that even exists is pretty amazing. And another time, for people who are local, they might not realize this, but if you want to go see Isaac Newton's study, it's in Babson College. Roger Babson was a big devotee, and he was very wealthy, and he literally collected books, letters, documents, Isaac Newton, and he bought Isaac Newton's study and had it brought to Wellesley. So I don't know whether you can just call up and say, can I do it? But you can literally be in Isaac Newton's study at Babson College. But one of the books they had, now when I went to college, I went to University of Massachusetts, and I had worked from the time I was 5, and whether or not my first word was book, that you'd have to ask my parents, but they're not alive anymore. But I just take their word for it that it was, and they were talking about them all the time. But I worked after school, elementary, junior high, high school, summers during college. I went to UMass. I have a degree in chemistry. I was going to go to Wisconsin to get a doctorate in chemistry. 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now is almost 50 years. But one of the books that I had to look at Babson College is they had a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. Now, that's $1 million book in and of itself, but this was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. And, you know, you sit there and you hold something like that and you go, wow. Now, it's interesting. That book went from Babson to MIT to the Huntington Library in California. Before the pandemic, there was a book show in Pasadena, and my wife and I went to the Huntington Library. I went to the glass case where that book was, and I go, yeah, I touched that one once. Now, this is an interesting one. My manager and I got called once, and we weren't told what we were getting called to look at. But we're in a building, we go down, there's a table like this with a couple of documents set out on it. And it was the Bill of Rights, the Pilgrim Charter, and a Declaration of Independence that was a year after the first issue, but it was the first declaration that actually printed the names. I mean, when you stop and think about it, having your name on the Declaration of Independence, if they had lost, you were a traitor, and you would have been probably executed. But it was also done in Baltimore. It was printed by a woman. But what made it particularly special, in ink, it was signed, "This is the true and authentic copy, John Hancock." So I did get to put my little finger on each one. And what that was, and actually what was happening, it was the Massachusetts State Archives, and they were forming a library, the Commonwealth Library, which is right across from the Kennedy Library. And they were just doing the museum, and they had to set it through some repairs. But I got to touch it, and they were sending it up to Andover to get a few repairs on it. When they sent it to Andover, those documents, actually shut down Route 93 with a motorcade because they didn't want any other vehicles on the road near them just in case. But you can see them now. They're enshrined in glass cases and so on, and it's fun. So that's one thing. And then you never know, again, what the items is, one time, and I used to bring things home to my daughters when they were young. They're in their mid-30s now and have children themselves. And I would bring home Audubons. I'd bring home this, and they'd go, "Oh, Dad's bringing home another old book," you know. But I knew I had one once. I went to a house in Belmont, and there was an old trunk, and at the bottom of the trunk was an envelope, a manila envelope. In the manila envelope was 10 letters of Thomas Jefferson, Adams, Monroe, and so on. But one of the letters, and this was just after 9/11, was by Thomas Jefferson, and he was talking about what you do about traitors and terrorists. Literally, in those words, he said in the letter that they should get the full protection of the law and absolutely nothing else. And my daughter said, "Yeah, we'll bring this to show and tell in school." And they got it. But when they got excited about it, I knew that there was really something there. And you never know what people are going to collect or what's going to turn people on. I mean, we go out to libraries and thousands of books, rare items. One time we got a collection of cookbooks in. And there were about 1,000 or more cookbooks, and some of them went back to the 1800s. But in the cookbooks, there were these two boxes of pamphlets, like How to Make Jell-O, Baker Chocolate Company, Golden Flour, you know, all of these little pamphlets. Some of them are really colorful, really nice, and they can go for a fair, you know, $5, $10, $20, but we just didn't have time. And I said, just put them outside. Put them on a dollar table. There'll be some bargains there, but we've got to spend our time on the better books. Put them out there. About a couple of hours later, a man comes running in with one of the pamphlets. And he goes, "I've been looking for this for years and years and years." And he goes, "And it's $1." And it's hard to express how excited he was. And he just went on and on. And then I looked at it. The title was Coconuts and Constipation. So you never know. You never know what people are going to run into. Now, one of the things at the beginning that was said that I do Antiques Roadshow. I hope you all watch it, because the more people watch it, the better their ratings. The more the ratings, the more the show will keep going. It's run over 25. It's on over 25 years now. I've done it for 20 of the years. And matter of fact, not this weekend, next weekend, I'm going up to Vermont. I was in Santa Fe. I was in Nashville this year for next year's shows. But the way that runs, we have a lot of fun doing it. First of all, a lot of people don't realize they don't pay us anything. We don't get airfare. We don't get hotel. We don't get meals. It's public television. Of course, what we do get is getting on TV. And that's great for PR, but there's no guarantee that you're going to get on TV either. Because the way the show's set up, they do it on a day. They used to do it at convention centers. Now they'll do it at museums or fancy houses around the country. And you appraise from about 7 o'clock in the morning, sometimes up to 6, 7 in the afternoon. There are 3,000, 4,000 people come. Each person has 2 items. So there's 6, 7, 8,000 items. They tape 100 or so. That makes up 3 hours of TV from each venue. And, you know, there'll be 3 book appraisers next to the jewelry, next to the posters, next to the whatever. And in order to get on TV, someone has to bring something in that's interesting, that there's a story, that you can tell them something about it, and maybe has value. But it's not just a valuable item, because people bring in things that are incredibly rare and valuable, but they know absolutely everything there is to know about it. They know more than we do. That doesn't make interesting television. So the ideal thing to happen at an Antiques Roadshow for an appraiser is around 8:30 in the morning. Someone brings something in. Gee, this is really good. You call a producer over. The producer comes over, talks to you out of earshot from the person, then talks to the person. The producer then says, yes, go on TV with it. By 9 o'clock, you've taped something. So the rest of the day is actually pretty easy, because you already know that you've taped something. Now, they do edit a few out, but if it's 4, 5, 6 in the afternoon and you haven't taped anything, you know, it's like, oh, gee, you know, I'm going to get shut out today. And there was one city in particular that I remember. It was Kansas City. And about 9 o'clock in the morning, a man comes in. He had a few things from Pope John Paul. Nothing terrific, nice, but not great. But then he pulls out some photographs. It turns out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country when he came in the 70s. And he had pictures in the plane. He also had stories about what was going on behind the scenes and going on. And then he pulled out this one picture. And usually when you see the Pope in a picture with a person, it's very formal. The Pope is in his vestments. He's standing there. The people are kneeling in front of him, kissing his ring. I mean, it's a very formal. This picture, the pilot was in his uniform, in the cockpit of the plane, in his pilot seat. The Pope was actually in his full vestments, but the pilot had his Bible. The Pope was like this, with his leg up in the air, reaching over, signing his Bible. And I'm going, this is great. And then I say to the, I said, well, show me the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go home and get it? He goes, no, it's in a safe deposit box. It's Saturday. And it was like, ah. But eventually that day I did get something in, so it was good. And one of the things when you do appraisals, either at the store or online, but particularly in person at a road show or something, most people are happy. Matter of fact, one of the things that when you first do this, and people might not realize, is actually everybody would assume that people are only happy when you tell them that things are worth thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands. Actually, more people are happy when you tell them it's not worth anything, because then they go, great. We don't have to worry about it anymore. We can give it to the museum, the library, the book sale. We can read it. We can give it to the grandchildren, whatever. So actually, more people are happy, but you can never make everybody happy all the time. And my wife, for a year or two, did appraising at the Antiques Roadshow, but I can sit there. Well, actually at work, my wife says I only work half a day. I get in at 5:30 in the morning, we close at 5:30 in the afternoon. It's 12 hours, it's only half a day. And when I do these talks, it's a little longer. But she doesn't enjoy, she does all the everything behind the scenes at the store. But she didn't enjoy being 12 hours there with the crowds and all of that. So she did a year or two. And when you're at the Antiques Roadshow, the appraisers try to be very nice. People have gotten tickets. They're excited about coming. A lot of times they've stayed in line, and if it's a hot day, so you try to always know, you can look down the line and go, junk, 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 junk. Oh, maybe that one's good. And you could probably just say that. But you want to be nice to people and look at it and touch it and so on. So a lady brings in a book to my wife, and she says, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife looks at it and spends, maybe half a minute, and says, it is signed by A. Lincoln, just not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady goes, how can you tell? I mean, in that. And my wife said, well, first she opens the book back up and turns to the title page. She said, well, the first clue is this book was printed in 1915. And the lady goes, so? And she goes, well, when I was studying in school, I learned that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. Lady slammed it closed, goes, you don't know what you're talking about, and left. So you just can't make everybody happy about everything. And like I say, I can go on and on with these. Well, let's see. Another time, too, I went in, I bought a collection on the beats, actually just a couple of days ago. But one time I got called to Drake, Massachusetts, and it was a post-World War II ranch house, nothing special. The people had mentioned a few books, I don't remember, it was a younger man. And after I was looking at the general books, they had a kitchen table, one of those old format kitchen tables, and there was this big roll of paper on the kitchen table. It was like a teletype roll. It was the manuscript for On the Road. I mean, the original manuscript. And I got to pick it up, hold it. I unrolled it a few feet. It was too fragile. It was 120 feet long. I mean, it was too fragile. It turned out Kerouac was his uncle. But I mean, it was sitting there. Now, they sold it, and this was 30, 40 years ago, for $2.5 million. And quite honestly, that wasn't what was valuable in the estate. What was valuable in the estate was the copyrights of all of his books. But to be able to pick up and touch, and I'll tell one more story, and then what I'll do is I'll take some questions, because we've got to keep it somewhat within the time. And then I'll tell two last stories and valuable things. But we had a man, and one of the things I tell my employees is, you never know who's going to come in and who they are or who they might be. We had a man, when I first started with my father full-time in the early 70s, who used to come in. He went to business school in Boston, and when he was in school, he used to come in. And he was in a bank in North Carolina. He was a vice president. No offense if any of you in banks. Banks have lots of vice presidents. Anyways, he'd come in, and he knew even then I got in early. And he'd sometimes say, I have to go to New York. I have some business, but I can take the shuttle when you could just walk on and fly to Boston. And then there's a flight that goes to Charlotte at 9 or 10. And that way I come in at 7. And he did, and he was a really nice man. And he bought some nice books. And over a few years, he was then an executive vice president, a senior vice president, and then his bank merged, and he was president of Bank of America. And he would sometimes still call up and say, can I come in early? I mean, he's president of Bank of America. He was the nicest guy. Unfortunately, he had some health issues, died young, but this student who was going to college ended up being Bank of America. And this is one story about never judging things. And this isn't mine. This is a colleague of ours in California. They didn't have a general used bookstore. They had a rare bookstore. And this street person comes in, scruffy, long hair, not very well dressed, and asks, do you have any Bibles? And, that's almost like, if someone comes in asking, anyways, he was nice. He pulled out a few, showed them. And then the person sort of wandered out, and they left, and the employees come up to him and go, what did Bob Dylan want? So again, you never know. Again, I can just go on and on and on, but why don't I see if there are some questions, because no matter what you ask me, I can go off on a tangent, so it doesn't take that much. But does anyone have any? Yes?
What are some interesting books you've gotten from talks like these?
Well, one of the things that people think I go to talks like these. One of the question is, what are some of the things that I've gotten actually from talks like this? And it's interesting, almost never do I get something from a talk like this. And in a way, it's good and it's bad for me. What happens is we get the goodwill, and we come and we speak, the publicity and all that. And what will sometimes happen is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, someone will call up and they say, well, we saw you at the Concord Museum, or they didn't even come, but they heard about it. And then when they have an estate, they don't even know where they heard of us, and it comes in. But people have brought some really interesting things. One I did recently, a man had a little small book. It was a poetry book done by a woman named Phyllis Wheatley in the 1700s. She was the first African-American poet. She was a slave at the time, but this is the first book published by an African-American poet. And she signed some of them, and this was signed by her. And again, you're holding this, and it was a $20,000 or $25,000 book that was just brought in. So people do come in with things, and every once in a while something that they didn't realize was valuable. There was one time someone brought in, there's a little thin book, and they had brought in a few books that weren't worth anything. And there's a little thin book by a man named Ledyard. and his family is from Connecticut, where the casinos are, but this was done in the 1700s. He was the only American who was on the voyage with Captain Cook around the world. He was supposedly with Captain Cook in Hawaii when Cook was killed. A little thin book of an American's account of the voyages, and there was a map. Now, if you actually go to try to look up this book, almost everything you'll see on it has a value of $5,000, $7,000, $8,000, lacking map. It almost always says lacking map. And I suspect, I've never done the research for this, but I suspect when the book came out, probably you had to pay $1 extra to get the map. And so most people didn't. Well, it turns out it's the first printed map in America of the Hawaiian Islands. So it's worth $50,000 or so for the map. And, someone brought it, and they had no clue what it was. But that's the whole, a little of that is like the whole concept of the Antiques Roadshow. And, there have been a few things that have come in like that on the show, where there was one, I don't remember the city, but there was one city where someone brought in a box, and this has happened at lectures and so on, but they brought in a box that went to the folk art department. And I guess it was a nice box, and they said it was worth a few $100s, but at the bottom of the box were some letters. And so I'm friends with most of the appraisers, and that's one of the fun things. You go all over the country. I mean, why would I ever go to Boise or Birmingham or Omaha and anywhere you go in this country, if you have, and I'm fortunate, I usually can go a little bit early. My wife comes with it. Anywhere you go, if you spend a little time, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, the people are very nice. Don't talk about politics and religion, but and then most of the appraisers, we know each other, we go out to dinner together, it's very social. Matter of fact, during the pandemic, there's one couple in New York that my wife and I, who do the roadshow, that we have FaceTime dinner every Sunday for 2 years in the pandemic. So we get close. But in any case, in the bottom was this letter, and it was about 4 pages long. And it was a soldier was sick in the Civil War. He was in a hospital in Washington, and he wrote a letter home saying, I love your letters, I have diarrhea, I hope I'm getting better. But he just went on, please write, I want to know about this person, that person, so on. It was a very personal letter. But what made it special, at the very end of the letter, there was a little parentheses, and it said, written by his friend, Walt Whitman. Yeah, Walt Whitman volunteered during the Civil War and would help, especially if either a soldier was too ill to write or couldn't write, illiterate, wasn't literate. And so this whole 4 pages was all in Walt Whitman's handwriting. And those letters are particularly rare because if you were getting a letter from Walt Whitman in the 1860s, if you knew who he was, who most of the people did, you knew he was something special and you saved the letters. Whereas being sent home by a soldier, probably 3/4 of the people had no clue who Walt Whitman was in the first place, so a lot of those letters weren't saved. So that's, you get things. And now another thing that was nice on the roadshow that I liked is someone in Sarasota. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Boston busing and all of that, but someone in Sarasota brought a photograph. It was the photograph with at City Hall with the demonstration and the black man, Ted Landsmark, being grabbed by a kid, and another kid with an American flag and the point going at him. And the photograph won the Pulitzer Prize. But this was an inscribed copy to the editor of the Herald by the photographer. Well, I actually know the photographer, and he got it. So they said I could do the photograph. I did it. But later I was actually at a funeral and the photographer was sitting behind me and I said, at the roadshow I did one of your photographs. He goes, oh, what was it worth? But one of the things that really was great is a year later, the roadshow got Ted Landsmark, Stanley Foreman, who was the photographer, at the site where the photo was and did a whole follow-up interview with where it was taken, what was going on, and I got to listen to the whole thing. So things like that can happen. Any other questions or, no? Yes?
How does one make an appointment?
Question is how does one make an appointment? Well, when people call up and they say they have an estate, the conversation usually goes like this. The first question we ask is how many books? Usually the first answer is a lot. Then we ask, what kind of books do you have? And the usual answer to that is fiction and nonfiction, which is everything ever done. And so we try to narrow it down, 50, 100, 500, 1,000. Is there any particular subject, area, field? If someone says, oh no, it's all kinds of books, well, that's one thing. If they say we have 500 books on the history of Concord or the American Revolution or so on, if they have a lot on one subject, usually that's a good indication that whatever that subject is, that there's probably something there. Also, the less the book's about, usually the better the book is. If you have a 200-page book on all of world history, it is probably not a detailed history of the world. Whereas if you have a 200 or 300-page book of Concord, it's probably a good book. And one lady, she brought into me at the store, I wish she had brought it at Antiques Roadshow. If you happen to have Belknap's History of Concord that was signed twice, one H.D. Thoreau and another time David Henry Thoreau, and it was Thoreau's copy of the History of Concord, that's even better, I can assure you. So we ask questions like that, but nowadays, actually the best thing is, if you have a wall of books, just take digital photos of the wall and please have them in focus. That's a really important part. And if you can get 2 or 3 shelves usually in one picture, it's so much better than trying to list every book because we get to see what it looks like, we get to see the condition, and most of those we can tell what they are. Or we might say, well, the second shelf down, the third book on the right, we need to know this or that. And that's usually, and then we go out just about every day, and that's the fun. And most of them work out, some of them don't, some of them whatever. But that's how we do it.
So if I have a 3-volume set, one 3-volume set?
Well, it depends on what the 3-volume set is. One I can think of called McKinney's and Hall's History of the Indian Tribes of America, which is a beautiful hand-colored. Yes, we'd go out after that. If it's one 3-volume set of Sir Walter Scott's novels, that's a 1890s edition, no, we might not go out after that. So we try to ask a few questions and then we go out. But that's the fun part. And the other part that people don't realize about the used and rare book business is it's incredibly physical. If you buy 1,000 books in a 5th floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to move 1,000 books out of a 5th floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. And when we do in interviews with employees, the interview starts like this. Do you have any back, knee, arm, any injuries, any sports, athletic, and so on? Then we go through that. Then do you have any allergies to dust, mold, mildew? Then we go through that. Then we ask, where did you go to school? What's your background? And so on, because it's incredibly physical. And I consider it really lucky. I can still do most of it. But last winter, we bought 15,000 art books in a big Victorian house in New Haven. Now, first of all, most of the books were up in the attic. Art books are heavy. It was brutal, but we got them out. We're getting close to time. Is there anyone on?
There's a question. Someone's asking if it's true that one of the most valuable items ever on Antiques Roadshow was from the first show filmed in Concord. It was a complete set of presidential autographs.
I didn't do the first show. I didn't get on to the 5th year. And it's interesting. The first Antiques Roadshow was in Concord, and they had almost nobody at the show because who knew what Antiques Roadshow was? It was the first show. And someone did, from what I've heard, did come in with a complete set of presidential signatures. In other words, every president they had. And from what I hear, it was probably worth at the time, and this is $500,000 to $1 million, but they didn't want to go on TV. So not only did they bring in the best thing that at a show that not much was brought in, that they were dying to get stuff, they wouldn't go on TV with it. So I don't know if it was one of you or not, but now what happened is they went through the first season of Antiques Roadshow, then it appeared on TV. The second year, the show would open, and they had lines. People just lined up forever, and they actually had problems because the people were getting heat exhaustion and standing in line. So that's now when you apply to Antiques Roadshow, you go through a lottery, and they send tickets because that's partly to avoid the huge crowds and the long lines. So that is one that happened. I'm going to end talking about two things, and I don't do the appraisal. If you want, I'll do a couple of them formally, or I'll do them loud, but I get to work at 5:30 in the morning. I want to also leave, but I will do everybody's. And if anybody's online, again, send photos, call, talk. But I'll end with two last stories. A lot of times I get asked, what's the most valuable book that you've ever have or whatever. And I don't collect books. My father used to bring home 4 or 5 books a day for 30, 40 years. You can imagine what I read books, I bring them back, I resell them. I don't have a collection. My wife had a collection of 1,000 books on jazz, and she had a lot of signed studio photos. One was to Pops Who Taught Me Everything, Billy. And she had W.C. Handy signed things to other, just really things. And she just felt it was time to sell it, so that's it. One quick collection that we did have is before they had dust jackets, they used to have very nice decorative cloth covers. I got a copy once of a book with a decorative cloth cover, had a picture of a toilet on the title, on the front cover. The title was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper. I brought it home, showed it to my wife, put it in the bathroom. Then I got one that had a big eye staring out of the cover the next week. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you. We put that in the bathroom. This was in our house. It was a little half bathroom, no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves. There were 300 or 400 of these Victorian-style illustrated books. Now, you can buy these at library sales, book sales, very cheaply. Some are expensive, but individually, they might not seem like much. Graphically, they can make a great collection. But now there are 300 or 400 in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback. Loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable because every once in a while, a book will fall off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. In any case, the most valuable book I have, and I mentioned a few of the things, books that I've held, touched, these amazing things. But the book that means the most to me, I have a copy from the 1950s of The Night Before Christmas. It's a very nice illustrated edition. I have read that copy to my daughters from the time they were born. Now, a couple of the grandchildren, I've read it to them. But to the point, and it's always that copy, that illustrated, to the point where one of my daughters married a man from Texas. They live here, but they'd go to Texas for Christmas. Before FaceTime, I actually put it on YouTube so that she could, Christmas Eve, she could have it. Now, my other daughter, who actually is coming, her flight got canceled, but she lives in Nairobi, and she's trying to get here now for a week or so. I've read it to her, FaceTime and all that, but it's always that copy. That particular copy of The Night Before Christmas is more valuable to me and means more to me than some of these great items and so on. And I heard another dealer tell that story similar, and I said, can I steal that story because it means a lot to me And he said, go right ahead. Last story is about Bibles. And the reason I like to talk about Bibles is the Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time. Always has been, probably always will be. And we sometimes get 5, 10 people a week with 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. And in most cases, we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible, sentimentally, it might be priceless, but monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, there are exceptions. There's the Gutenberg Bible. There are Bibles that have very detailed family histories in them. A lot of times museums, historical societies, but all they want to do is photocopy, digitally get that information, the title page. They don't want the big old Bible. I got a call to a large old church in Boston, well over 100-year-old church. And they had a huge library, and over the years, they had just accumulated books. They wanted me there just to see if they had accumulated any valuable books. They actually had. There were a few. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There were a few more books. I went down and looked at a few more books. But then there was a room, or a small closet. I'm assuming since you had chairs in that closet there, it's more than a closet. It's this small. Priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. It was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I go, what is this? And he said, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We don't want to offend anybody. We very graciously accept it. Then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That just wouldn't be right. So I use it as an example that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, that's great. But if you're really not doing anyone a favor. Again, a couple of things. I do the podcast. There's a little over 100 of them. It's called Brattlecast. I put out a new one every 2 weeks. And they're 15, 20, 25 minutes long. So if you like the stories, there's a lot of them. Don't ever hesitate to call, ask, get in touch. Don't ever feel you're bothering us. We'd much rather have 100 people call with nothing special than to have that 101st person just say they threw away Ledyard's book on Hawaii or Tamerlane by whatever. And again, we all like what we do. And if you ask someone a question and they like what they do, the problem isn't, it's problem getting to stop answering. So thank you very much. I'll sort of end it there and then off, and you can line up orderly or you can just crowd around me. I'm not going to do it individually. And the reality is the less order there is, the faster it goes. If anyone has a big stack though, when there are people waiting, I'll only do one and then tell you to go to the end, and then I'll do them all. So thank you very much.